Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just gave you a couple of upset alerts to watch for this upcoming weekend. Definitely some ones out there that I think are a little bit sketchy. USC going all the way across the country, something to watch there. But let's get into a little bit of a week 8 whip around all of the games that we just haven't had a chance to really get into in depth. And there are some good ones out there that I want to be able to touch on for you guys. And we got one tonight. This is a very interesting matchup for a number of reasons because this doesn't jump off the page. I fully understand that. These are two teams that came into the year with a little bit of juice. Boston College playing good football with Thomas Castellanos. Virginia Tech returning, I believe, 19 starters of 22. A lot of juice going into this season for both these teams. It's come up a little bit flat. Boston College has kind of started to taper off. Virginia Tech, honestly, has kind of started to ramp up, but the start to the season was very, very rough. That being said, Virginia Tech finds themselves in kind of an interesting spot in the ACC race. They don't necessarily have a huge room for error at this point, no two ways about that, but they get Clemson at home later in the season. They do have SMU and Pitt. Both of them could make a run. Both these teams are very, very dangerous. Boston College has SMU and Pitt on the schedule. Virginia Tech has Clemson at home. But those are the only two games on this schedule that either of these teams could not win or I wouldn't necessarily like them, and I guess is the best way to put it. So maybe it's one of those moments for Virginia Tech or for Boston College where they get things rolling, they start rolling downhill, and Virginia Tech gets a huge win over Clemson, finds themselves right back into the race. I think that's a little bit far-fetched, but at the end of the day, still very much on the table for them. And I think Virginia Tech might have actually found something on offense the last couple of weeks. 34 points against Miami, 31 against Stanford. Kyron Drones starting to make those off-schedule plays that he's so dynamic making. The wide receiver core is really, really deep, especially in the ACC where it's pretty much Miami, Clemson, and everyone else. Having a lot of those receivers on the outside is absolutely huge, and Boston College seems to be regressing to me. I think Thomas Castellanos is a really good player. He hasn't seemed the same since that injury. I don't necessarily think he quite gets it right in this one. So I think this is a little bit of a turning door moment for Virginia Tech. I'm not necessarily betting on them to get all the way back in the ACC race, but they could get to that Clemson game undefeated going forward. They could get to that Clemson game, and maybe it's one of those that you toss one up and they get a huge win and everything changes in the ACC in a hurry. But as of right now, they got to get this win this Saturday and then keep moving forward. But I do like Virginia Tech in that one. Then we got another one, a huge matchup with Oklahoma State heading up to Provo to face off against number 13 BYU on Friday. This is one where BYU continues to roll along. One of the best coach teams in the entire country. A very, very talented quarterback in Jake Retzlaff that is leading them very, very well right now. Oklahoma State's just still searching for Ollie Gordon. I don't think he's coming up anytime soon, I'll be totally honest with you, but at the end of the day, it's very, very interesting. It's one of those things that if they can't do that, then I don't think they can do much of anything offensively, especially against this defense, and BYU is 36th in the country in rushing yards allowed. So I wouldn't necessarily bet on it. Them being only a 9-point favorite, frankly, is very, very weird to me. Could very well be a best bet tomorrow. But as of right now, I have no reason to doubt BYU. I have just about every reason to doubt Oklahoma State. So I'm going to lean towards BYU in this game. An interesting one here in the ACC where we got a Clemson team that is rolling right along kind of the same way as BYU. We have a Virginia team that's coming off a loss that effectively knocked them out of the ACC race. They have way too many games coming forward that are going to be really tough. Now, that being said, they win this one and maybe a lot changes over there, but it's going to be an interesting matchup for that Clemson defense. I don't think they're necessarily going to get exposed in any way, but Anthony Coulanger can cause just enough issues with his legs. He had 84 rushing yards against Louisville last week. Maybe it's one of those things that Clemson's defense just shows that couple of holes that Miami watches that tape and they say, okay, that's the way we can attack them, and it's definitely something where you really just want to take care of business. I think this is just going to be another notch on Clemson's belt as they head forward to the ACC title, and it's going to be really interesting to watch. But at the end of the day, I expect Clemson to roll in this one. I expect a big game from Cade Klubnik because this Virginia back end is not all that good. So I think Clemson keeps rolling right along and ends up probably on a collision course with Miami in that ACC title. Then we got the service academies. East Carolina against Army is an interesting one, and frankly, I won't waste too much time on this game because East Carolina gives up 170 yards on the ground, and I expect Army to get well over that number on Saturday. East Carolina is a very up-and-down defense, played great against App State, played terribly against Charlotte last week, so I expect Army to win. I think it's going to be a Bryson Daly show, and they continue right on their merry way. And then on the other side, you got Charlotte actually playing Navy this upcoming week, but the reality is kind of the same exact thing here. Charlotte is actually worse against the run. They allow 200 yards per game, and I think it's going to be a Blake Horvath show. So it's one of those things that I love both these teams, love seeing them undefeated, and I don't think this is the week that they go down. Maybe there's a something here that I'm missing a little bit, but frankly, if you're giving up anywhere close to 200 yards per game going into that matchup, I feel pretty confident you're going to give up over 200 in that matchup. So I'm going to bet on both those service academies to get that win. And then a very interesting one here because I cannot figure out why Cincinnati's favored in this game. I understand they're at home. They've been playing pretty good football, but Arizona State's really rolling downhill. You know, Brendan Sorsby, I do want to give some credit here. 1,700 yards, 13 touchdowns, 3 interceptions on the year. But on the other side, Cam Scadaboo, can he take over another game? He was absolutely incredible. The Cincinnati run defense is kind of middle of the pack, 157 yards per game, so nothing absolutely crazy, but nothing terrible either. Can he find openings? You would have to assume. With the way that he runs the football, he pretty much creates openings himself. So I would bet that he'd be able to get his thing going. But at the end of the day, I think this is going to be a really, really interesting game. It's kind of a ground game versus a pass game in a lot of different ways. Can Cincinnati hit those shots, or will ASU be able to kind of ground out a win? I tend to believe it's going to be Arizona State in this one. It's a very interesting game and could be one that kind of sets up either one of these teams for a little bit more success than they thought this year, but I do think Arizona State gets the win and this really fun run by the Sun Devils continues. Talk about a weird matchup. This is a very, very interesting one that's going to be going down in Norman, Oklahoma this upcoming weekend, and frankly, when we talk about mismatches this year, I don't think you're going to find a bigger one than South Carolina's D-line against Oklahoma's O-line. If we're talking about in-conference matchups, that is an absolute dominating for South Carolina's D-line. They are so disruptive. They are absolute monsters, and we saw Oklahoma's O-line for the first couple of weeks. It's a nightmare. So Michael Hawkins, you get another nightmare of a matchup to start your career. You had to play a Tennessee defense that was just terrifying to deal with, and you had to jump into that game. You had to go on the road to play at Jordan-Hare. Then you had to play Texas, and now you get to play the most terrifying defensive lineman in the entire country in Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard. So let's see how you handle it. It's going to be a nightmare. South Carolina does have to get a run game going here. Oklahoma is very, very tough against the run, but the reality is if Lenore Sellers is a little bit healthier this year or this week than he was last week, they're going to have to be able to get that going to open this one up. I'd lean South Carolina in this game very, very, very slightly. I don't necessarily love it. I think it's one of those games that kind of like that Auburn-Oklahoma game where as long as South Carolina takes care of the ball, they should be able to win, but maybe there's that one pick by that Oklahoma defense that makes the difference. I lean South Carolina, but frankly, this one's as much of a coin flip as any game this entire weekend as far as I'm concerned. And then we got an interesting one in the MAC, and this is fascinating to me because Miami of Ohio is favored by 3.5 points. Ohio is currently the betting favorite to win the MAC overall, so definitely will be a very interesting game in this one, and I think a win for Miami of Ohio would keep them in the fight. Ohio, if they got this win, would kind of pull away from the pack just a little bit in the MAC, and frankly, it's very, very hard to pull away from the pack in a conference that just absolutely cannibalizes each other. It's really, really a wild conference, and probably one of the reasons it's one of my favorite conferences in the country. But overall, I think the big thing in this game for Miami, Ohio is getting that run game going. The 2 games they've had Keon Mosey get over 100 yards. They've been able to win those games. Now, Ohio is stout against the run. They've been only allowing 118 yards per game, so it's going to be tough to get there, but the reality is if Miami of Ohio can't run the ball, then Blaine Gabbert's going to have a really, really tough job getting the ball where he needs to get it to, or Brett Gabbert. One of the two. They're brothers, so I get them a little bit confused. But at the end of the day, that quarterback definitely needs to be able to get a little bit of time, and that run game is going to be huge for him to do that. And on the other side, Ohio is being led by Parker Navarro, a very, very good dual threat quarterback, over 900 or nearly 900 yards passing, 400 yards on the ground. He is all over the place. I do like Ohio by a hair. I think if Miami of Ohio wins this one, the MAC race becomes like a 6-horse race. It's going to be an absolute nightmare down the stretch of that one. And another player to watch is Coleman Owen, a very talented player for Ohio. So definitely something to watch there. I do think Ohio wins this one, but Miami of Ohio has every ability to get this one done. And then you got chaos in the MAC as you do pretty much every single year. And this one could add to it just a little bit more. This is an elite matchup between two teams that are number 2 and 3 in the odds to win the MAC right about now. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one unfold, and a lot of talent on both sides of the offense, particularly on Toledo, but Northern Illinois has got plenty of guys as well, so no doubt about that. Toledo is coming off a loss to Buffalo, definitely something that they need to get back on track. Tucker Gleason is playing some pretty good football for them at quarterback, and then you got Jawan Newton on the outside, 517 yards, 7 touchdowns on the year. Plenty of talent on the outside for Toledo, and I expect them to be a little bit more of an aggressive pass team than Northern Illinois in this game, because the running back duo for Northern Illinois is downright special. Gavin Williams and Ontario Brown both have over 400 yards on the year, and they are as dangerous as they get in the entire country. I think with this game, they have every ability to take over, and Toledo's been solid against the run. I think these guys are just too much for them. I like NIU in a very, very close game, and I think them and probably Ohio end up being the teams to beat in the MAC going forward. And then we got this matchup. Iowa State hosts UCF in a very, very weird place for the Black Knights, because they made a quarterback change last week. Ja'Cory Brown made the start for them in that game, and I think he'll make the start in this one. E.J. Colson's being thrown around as a possibility, but I would assume that he's going to be the starter for this game. And going into Ames, Iowa is not an easy place to go for your very first start. So definitely something to watch there. I think last week it was West Virginia getting over 200. Last week I said, breaking down that Iowa State-West Virginia game, said West Virginia badly needs to get over 200 yards rushing if they're going to have pretty much any shot to beat Iowa State. I would say the exact same here, and maybe a little bit more aggressively on the ground, to be totally honest. Iowa State's only allowing 132 yards on the ground per game. I don't think it's going to be all that pretty for UCF, and frankly, not a lot has been all that pretty for UCF. Now, UCF is very good against the run. They're terrible against the pass. So I think this is that game where Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel get over 100 yards. This Iowa State offense kind of flexes their muscles just a little bit more through the air, and they kind of show everyone that they have that next gear to get to. So I do like Iowa State. I like them pretty comfortably. Maybe that's one of my best bets tomorrow. So definitely be on the lookout for that. But a lot of really fun games this upcoming weekend. I have Texas beating Georgia. It's going to be an incredible matchup over there in Austin. I just think with that speed that Texas has, it's going to be a load to deal with for that Georgia back end. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So whether it's the NFL or the NBA or anything in between, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.